brief introduction to what ecofeminism is, so we all start at the relatively same philosophical background and we're not all lost behind. So ecofeminism is a very, very diverse field within environmental ethics, and it's hard just to say what an ecofeminist ethic is. But all ecofeminists pretty much agree on a few key tenets. And the first one is, it's called the dual subjugation framework. It's the idea that there is a shared ideological and practical ties between the domination of nature and the oppression of women. And to understand feminism or environmentalism, you need to understand those key ties. The reason that the ties exist ideologically is because the ecofeminist ethic believes that the world is divided into dualisms. So man, woman, human, nature. And when we divide things into dualisms, we categorize things into up and down, good and bad, greater or lesser. And so by doing that, there's a shared logic of domination behind different forms of oppression. And so in that way, ecofeminism is a very intersectional ethic, because it's not just talking about women and nature, but it's talking about classism, heterosexualism, sexualism, all these different types of things. So hopefully that was a clear enough background. And so with that, we'll have our panelists introduce themselves. You can go down the line and say who you are, why you're here, and why you got you interested in ecofeminism.
Hi, my name is Nancy Tuckman, and I'm the Dean of the Institute of Environmental Sustainability. And I don't know very much about ecofeminism, but I'm here because I really think the SEA is a terrific group of students, and I wanted to be a part of this.
Hi. Hi, I'm Brandon Morgan Olson. I'm a professor in the philosophy department. I mostly do social and political philosophy and ethics. I'm by no means an expert in ecofeminism, but I do teach it when I teach environmental ethics. So that's my entry point into this conversation.
Hi, I'm Ansley Osterguy. I'm an environmental studies major, sustainability management minor. I started studying ecofeminism freshman year. I'm a junior now. I'm just glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm a student here. I'm studying psychiatry, pre-med. I'm on the board for Feminist Forum, so that's the oldest organization for feminism on campus. Ecofeminism is pretty new to me, but I'm really interested.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm a senior here studying biology with a minor in women and gender studies, and I'm here representing Students for Reproductive Justice. And my interest in ecofeminism started based on the intersections of reproductive justice and environmental justice.
Thank you all for introducing yourself. So we'll begin with our first question or idea. So lots of times ecofeminist literature and dialogue is based around ideology, and it's not practically applied often. So is ecofeminism just like some type of abstract idea that we should use to think about women and nature, or do you see it really manifesting itself in the world? Anyone can answer at any time. Should preface that.
Okay, so I would say ecofeminism is not just a philosophy, it's something that we can apply to our everyday lives. The core of this theory is to put the philosophy into action, because it's how the degradation of women in the environment is causing such a tremendous impact on our lives today. Ecofeminism has a lot under its umbrella, like Rosie was talking about, and ignoring women's needs leads to further uncontrolled population growth, infant mortality rates, decreased economic growth. It deteriorates the environment, divides our society. It's completely relevant and not just a philosophy, and it needs to be taken, or it needs to be educated, and so that's why you guys are here, I hope. Something I want to mention was that the intersectionality approach could be seen more in developing countries, in terms of like how I understand it. For this, if you look at a woman who's in a developing country who has to decide between a career and supporting her family, oftentimes, society permitting, she can't divide her family duties between her and her husband. And this concept is easiest to understand with an ecofeminist author I was reading about. Her name's Mary Meller. If you if you know her. She describes a concept called the economic man. And what this is that people today live in a gendered society where the feminine, whether females or males in the feminine role, have the responsibility both domestically and reproductively. And the economic man is the role of a man or a woman who is working to yield the biggest profit from their job and disregard life outside of the job. So when women take on careers, they are doing so in the role of a man, and like either sacrificing or giving up the role of a female. Instead of being looked at as a woman, as a professional, they're looked at as a woman in a man's world, and that's how it applies today. I can relate this to my own life experience too. And when I was 12, I first started my job as a referee for soccer, and my assigner said to me that in order to be taken seriously as a female, I had to look like a professional, not a girl. He told me that I couldn't have nail polish on my nails, that I had to tie my hair back, that I couldn't express my emotions when talking to coaches and players. I was supposed to be an economic man, not a professional person.
I think also practically that ecofeminism begins to recognize a lot of the intersections between all types of justice issues, because so many environmental issues affect those who are on our lowest socioeconomic levels, those who are people of color, and those who are otherwise put in kind of the second tier of what is privileged in society. So many of these issues are so intersecting in how they impact each individual's lives, because an environmental issue can affect how you access different resources within the community, and likewise, these are all kind of, I guess, interconnected in how you live your life on the day-to-day.
Okay, yeah, just to build off those things, I think that both thinking in terms of the developing world is exactly helpful, right? And also in terms of thinking about what's been made invisible to us is a place that ecofeminism really helps us. This the way that things have been structured so that women's lives aren't noticed, or women's work isn't noticed, or is valued in various different ways. And frameworks like ecofeminism are things that point out those things that aren't being paid attention to, and allow you to sort of be able to see it in your everyday lives, and allows you to open your eyes to it. And you were making me think of my favorite example of the sort of invisibling and disvaluing that goes on in the developing world is, in a lot of places in the developing world, for whatever reason, historically, it's women's work to gather water. And it's that's considered a woman's job. And so often, it'll be an extraordinary feat to go get water, and it'll take a long time. And as there's environmental degradation, that job will get harder. But that job isn't actually counted as valuable, or that water isn't counted as valuable. It's just supposing that's something that's supposed to show up, basically. And it's an expectation of women to do. But if there's a development project that comes in and then builds pipes to extract that water into an economic system, suddenly it becomes valuable, and men are the ones hired to both build the pipes and monitor them and get them, and suddenly that work is now valued because it's been transferred into a sphere of man's work. And I think ecofeminism helped exactly see, wait, there's been a huge, obvious thing that I was missing before that helps me call attention to, and then that changes not just the way I think, but how I act or how I want things to be in the world. And most importantly, it helps lead you towards thinking about how things could be different than they are. I think that's one of the strengths of ecofeminism. It doesn't just say, hey, these things are really messed up, because they are, but also give you some resources for thinking about different ways to do it than how it's been done.
I'll just say that as an activist, and those of you also that are activists are usually trying to give voice to someone or something that doesn't have a voice. And it's typically women and children and other forms of life that I think have tremendous intrinsic value, plants and animals and even inanimate things like water and air. Those are all things that are critical for everyone's life and everyone's livelihood, but they have no voice and they end up being kind of dumping grounds or else exploited in the same way that women and children are oftentimes exploited. So it's a real easy connection to see how our capitalist society is always looking to deplete natural resources to make some sort of a thing, a gadget or a product that we then will purchase and use, and then when we're done with it, it goes into some sort of a waste stream. So our economy is constantly being pushed to grow, 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 and if our GDP doesn't grow, we all freak out like, you know, we're gonna go into a recession and God, we can't have that. We have to keep pushing that GDP forever, up, up, up. And what that means is we have to continue depleting natural resources, and most of that is on the backs of women and children, and then we have to make products and then produce all this waste. And the best way to do that fast is to make disposable things that people will keep coming back and buying over and over and over again, and then adding to this waste stream. And so to me, it's really easy to see how this system is broken, because it's linear and it needs to be circular. It needs to be sustainable in a way that, you know, if we use natural resources and we engage people in making something that's useful, then that thing has to have a useful life even when it's done being useful. We have to be able to take those materials and bring it back into the system again.
Hi, okay, so I do believe ecofeminism is more than just a philosophy. I see it as an activist and academic movement. On the topmost layer of ecofeminism, there's little things here and there that we see like in our everyday lives that connect nature and the struggles and oppression of women. Just the feminine gendered language used to describe nature, Mother Nature, things of that idea, and then the animalized language to describe women, I feel like is very detrimental. And so exemplifying that connection between feminism and ecology, both manifest the oppression that comes from the patriarchal society.
So something important that was just touched upon is the idea of eco-maternalism. So the idea that sometimes when we talk about the earth or the role of women, we use gendered language. So Mother Earth, or sometimes if you ask people in interviews, they'll say that women are more likely to be environmentalists because they have the role as a caring nurturer. And so sometimes you can see language like Mother Earth is really empowering and interesting because it's giving women this role as a bringer of life and something fundamental to everyone, but you're also keyholing them in their role as a mother. And like we talked about, devaluing women's work, they're not just, here to provide for other people. So I guess the question that would come out of that is, do you think that eco-maternalist language is inherently oppressive, or do you see it as something that can be evolved into empowering and that we should use more of?
I would say, was it working? Okay. I would say that the mindset of eco-maternalism can empower and inhibit at the same time. You see it empowering women with the ability that women can give birth and create life. That is seen as a very positive thing. But when people cannot reproduce or they don't have maternal or feminine characteristics, they're looked at as very negatively. If you can't conceive a child or you're forced to conceive a child, that is definitely inhibiting and not empowering whatsoever.
And I think touching on that, it comes back to women's reproductive capabilities and how those are looked upon and treated by society. I think in the same way that we look at the Earth's resources and how we can utilize those and control those, which is typically dominated by the white male perspective and the control through different economic and production means, that same control is enforced on women and their reproductive choices. And it's so commonly white male legislators and capitalists who are controlling what we can choose for ourselves. So I think going back to like eco-maternalism, that it can be empowering if women are kind of able to choose how that applies to them and where they see themselves fitting into it, and whether that's something that they kind of want to self-identify with versus it being imposed upon them continuously by kind of this patriarchal structure within society.
That was a good point. For sure. Something I want to touch too is I am definitely nervous at approaching eco-maternalism as a concept, because if you think about it, as Rosie said, it sticks us in a keyhole for one point, and anytime we assume, say you drop a piece of paper wrapper on the ground and within the hour it got blown away and to you it's gone and the ecosystem has taken care of it. To me, eco-maternalism sounds like the woman's role as the ecosystem's role. It's something that we do invisible and behind the scenes, and we're expected to have it done so that problems are no longer apparent, and women aren't given the same respect or the same recognition for the work they do, just as the environment isn't given the same respect or the work recognition for what it does to keep us alive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And actually, I want to sort of build on a point that Christina made. I'm also nervous about sort of taking eco-maternalism as a whole contract, exactly because I historically I've seen it that those associations used as exactly the tool of oppression. Right? It's part of the logic of domination is being able to associate women with nature, and that you buy into the fact that nature isn't as good as human society, and therefore if women is like nature, then women aren't as good as men, right? It's been used to oppress and been imposed in that sort of way, and it's also a thing that can be imposed, and even not necessarily from the most powerful to the least, but in order to label someone as not the right sort of woman or not woman enough, right? You don't care about having kids, so therefore you aren't a woman or not the right sort of woman, right? So that isn't to say that it's something intrinsically bad about it, because I think you've all made good points, but it's a question of what you're doing with it, and I think that's exactly the helpful framework. Like, are you doing something with it in terms of empowering yourself or self-identifying? Well, that's a totally different story than how it's being used to impose set expectations on other people, and that's sort of what ecofeminism is exactly trying to resist, is that sort of setting and limiting and narrowing of roles and expectations.
It's a very sensitive topic, isn't it? It's something that touches on a lot of nerves and can offend people easily and make people feel badly about themselves. I don't like that about it. What I like about terms like Mother Earth is that I see women as being really strong, because women kind of do get kicked around and marginalized, at least in the workplace, and oftentimes bullied. Bullying goes on all the time. But women just do not give up. They have huge tenacity, and they become leaders, and they rock it, because they're very committed to what they believe in. And I think that's how the earth is. The earth takes a lot of abuse, but it continues going, and it continues supporting us, and it continues giving us the air and the water and the nutrients that we need to survive. And that's what women do. Women are nurturers, women are lovers, women are really amazing human beings. And so I don't take offense at Mother Earth. I find it to be a privilege, and I just thought I would throw that other perspective out there as a mother.
So sorry to keep throwing at you criticisms of ecofeminism, but something that's often brought up is that when we talk about the discipline, you're categorizing it, you're either a woman or you're not a woman. And so in that way, you're masking a lot of the diversity that the term woman has to show. And I was curious, how would you comment on that, or what are ways that we could try to combat this problematic issue?
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. Ecofeminism is all about being inclusive, including what we do in a day-to-day life to think about how it's going to impact the environment, including women and other people who are discriminated against in everything we do. It's about raising up one to raise up everyone. And when you exclude non-binary, transgendered women and label ecofeminism as perhaps eco-maternalism, it's exclusive, and that's the complete opposite of what we're trying to get at.
I'll go again. I think that was really well put. And again, just to kind of throw another perspective on it, I think that every human being, and it doesn't matter what your gender is, has the capacity to love and nurture and care and give and be compassionate. And those kinds of traits tend to be assigned more to women than to men, but everybody has that capacity, just like everybody has the capacity to hate and to want to dominate and to be angry and to be violent. And those tend to be more assigned to males. But what I would say is what's best about all of us, what's good about human beings, is that loving side and that caring and nurturing. And that's, the inclusivity that women have, I think, really empowers us as humanity to work together to solve big problems like climate change. Everybody has to be included, and everybody also has to step up, and everybody has to participate. So I think the idea of collaboration and cooperation is where women feel the most comfortable playing on a team and being a real team player, and everybody in the boat, pulling the oars in the same direction. That's where women really feel comfortable, because that's where they're part of a team and where they can really make a difference. And I think those are all good qualities, but they're in every gender.
And I think building on the inclusivity conversation, that part of what we can do to be inclusive is to change the language in how we describe women and their what they can produce versus, and its comparison to the environment as it's seen in so much of eco-maternalism. So we use the words like fertile and barren to describe whether or not a woman can have children. And so that type of language just kind of draws that link. And so I think if we stop focusing on what women can produce and going off of what was said earlier and focus on what everyone can produce, which is kind of the love and contributing to their community and those type of things, that then we can build a more inclusive ecofeminism that is open to anyone, whether male-identified, trans-identified, non-binary, or cisgendered woman.
Yeah, you guys are making me think, and one way to put some of these points is to think that ecofeminism is particularly good at being sort of holistic, and by that I just mean drawing connections between things that people want you to think are totally disparate, totally distinct. I often think of that sort of part of the logic of oppression is a justa way of thinking, which is to say, like, that's just a rock, that's just a lake, that's just a cow, that's just a woman, right? And I think ecofeminism helps when you link some of those things together, it helps you resist that thinking, right? Because when I say just a rock, that might not hit you that hard, right? But when I say just a woman, I think your sensors go up a little bit, like, wait, that makes me feel awkward, right? Makes me feel weird. And then if you think, well, maybe some of the same thing is going on when I said just a rock, but you can sort of trace those things back and be like, okay, this is helping me push back against any type of thinking that's telling me from the outside that I'm just a whatever. That helps with, that speaks with all your points about diversity and inclusion and whatnot.
So when people hear the word feminism, a lot of times they associate with female, and it's pretty easy to do that for people that have not heard of the topic of ecofeminism. But I definitely agree that feminism and ecofeminism is not just about women or females. It's talking about nature and the oppression of all kinds of women and all kinds of minorities. And you don't have to put a label on, we're talking about women and this type of women, because it's intersectional. So yeah, anyone who can bring forth the capability of compassion for the nature and for the oppressed is doing ecofeminism justice.
So something that we've been touching on is that Brandon, you gave the example of women in developing countries and how ecofeminism specifically, Nancy too, sorry, applies to them particularly. But so lots of the literature also focuses on women in the global south. But something that Christina was talking about is how reproductive issues affect women, around the world, regardless if you're living in Chicago or if you're living in Nepal. So I was curious if any of you had any examples of, in your life in Chicago or living in the city, how women can identify with an ecofeminist ethic, because it's relevant no matter where you live.
So I'm going to take us outside of Chicago to Flint, Michigan for my example. In doing my research to speak on this panel, I looked pretty heavily into kind of the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and how that impacted women specifically. And so if we look at April of 2014, when the water supply was switched from Lake Huron to the Flint River, we see from that point forward, there's a 12% drop in birth rates and a 58% increase in fetal death rates, starting from that point and moving forward. So something as simple as changing a water source and what that led to, which was exposure to increased levels of lead, that can impact an entire generation of people moving forward. So many of these were wanted pregnancies and were things where women did not have a choice on whether or not they were going to be able to carry to term or to raise their children in a safe environment with access to clean water. And that is in what reproductive justice and ecofeminism and environmental justice is all about. Because we see this community in Flint, which 50% of the community is Black, and approximately 50% of the community lives below the poverty line. We see those who are most at risk in our society being most affected by environmental issues because they do not have a voice to go up against the structures that exist in our society which put them in these positions.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm from 15 minutes away from Flint, and I do kind of agree that the problem is still going on. It's really heartbreaking to see such irreplaceable damage. And yes, women and minorities were hit the hardest because it's below the poverty line that cannot have access to water and still cannot have access to water. It's such an important resource. Obviously, you need such thing to live. And the fact that these people who are still fighting for this issue cannot receive like an important natural resource is really frustrating. And I do think that ecofeminism is something that if we brought this to light and was able to change legislation in some way, maybe places like Flint and other crisis areas could receive the help that they can get. But unfortunately, like no matter how much we work for it, they are not hearing the voices that need to be heard. Even after the issue was brought to light, it had been happening for months, a year before it actually was on the news, before anybody knew about it. So I would say that's very frustrating. And yeah, ecofeminism would be an important thing to bring up for sure.
So last semester I did a study on climate change, seeing how coastal cities are adapting to sea level rise and flooding. And I focused in on New Orleans, which is a highly diverse city, majority African Americans. And I wanted to see how the city could respond to increasing hurricanes, especially as global warming persists and these type of storms are going to hit harder and more frequently. When you look at the people who are affected the most are those who can't move. You warn them that a hurricane is coming, but if they don't have the resources and the city hasn't set up a plan to help them, we are neglecting these individuals. Women and especially single mothers were hit the hardest to try to exit. Lower income families without personal vehicles couldn't leave, and systems that were in place completely flailed, like the Superdome overflowing with people that it predicted 50% less of those individuals would be there. So people didn't have enough food or water. Ecofeminism responds to this because it looks at how we even predict ecological issues, yet address them in a short-term manner instead of protect us in the long run. And by taking on this whole movement, we're not just taking on feminism or just the environment, we are trying to address all issues and address the bigger picture, because there's no use in addressing incremental issues if the whole system is under threat.
I'll mention the fracking that's going on in North Dakota and up in the back-end area of North Dakota and all the way up into Canada. When we're going after natural gas using fracking, it's typically in areas where there isn't a high population density, but you have to have a lot of people there working these rigs to basically destroy the groundwater and the earth to get this stupid natural gas out of the ground. And so all of these camps pop up, and they're just, trailers where you usually have 6 or 8 men living in a trailer together, and there'll be huge numbers of them together. They call them man camps. And there are hundreds of Native American women who are being exploited by these man camps, because these guys are making $100,000 to almost up to $200,000 a year by fracking, doing this fracking work. It pays incredibly well. And they don't really have anything to do out there, so they put up these bars and brothels, and there's not a lot to do except for exploit women and get drunk. And that's what they do. And there are hundreds of Native American women who are missing now, gone missing. Many of them we know have been raped and murdered. Others are just missing. And because the Lakota Sioux tribes and the Native American tribes are sovereign nations, they're not listed on our federal registry of humans, and so they're not listed in our missing people registry, which means the FBI, doesn't know about it and can't go and help them, and it's just a really terrible situation. And it's all because of, trying to get natural gas out of the ground, that we really should be using clean energy instead of natural gas in the first place. But putting these things up and then exploiting these women, I think, is a really great example of feminism at its worst, where we really are exploiting one particular group of women, and there's very little that is being done to help these women. And by the way, we're having one of the panels at the upcoming climate change conference is going to be about this, and there are going to be 2 women from the Lakota Sioux tribes. A woman named Loyola Lafferty has been keeping track of all the women who are missing, and so she's got the sort of the master list, and she's been working on this for about 15 years, and she and another colleague of hers are going to come and speak at the climate change conference. I hope you can come.
I just want to say, I think it's fairly apparent once you start asking people how actually easy it is to find examples like this. Right? You just sort of follow the money anywhere and see where we devote our resources and what we spend it on and who that benefits. And you end up finding example after example of the people who are taken advantage of being people who are already marginalized, whether they're poor or people of color or women or it's just people or you can keep going through. So to just sort of give 2 more examples, one very much like the fracking example is thinking about the Alberta tar sands and then the pipeline, whatever part of the pipeline you want to talk about, including the Dakota Access Pipeline. I think that's particularly poetic because it's very literally like people who are paying the price by having these things go through the land and having the valuable thing just rush by them, right, to go somewhere else to be used. But to bring it back more in Chicago, just one example is start thinking about resources we are spending, or rather sort of not spending on education. Thinking about sort of not really paying attention to the needs of children, especially children who go from places where they don't have very many resources to begin with, and how in not choosing to spend resources on making sure they have like as rich and vibrant and amazing educational experience as they can is exactly implementing the same sort of logic of domination.
Thank you all for your examples as how we can see this incredibly important conversation across our country, and your segue into the Chicagoland region is perfect for our last question, our last moderator question for the evening, which is how can we continue to have these conversations at Loyola? How can we continue to prepare our students to take this mindset, this awareness of this ecofeminism discourse following their time at Loyola, and just wherever it takes them throughout our country, throughout this world, just how can we continue to have these cross-disciplinary conversations?
I think it's easy to look outside of our city, our state, our country when it comes to issues of ecofeminism. But when you look right here at home, there's always something that you can do every day to make a difference and to speak up for what you believe in. Something that I learned from learning about ecofeminism is that progress is not a finish line, and there are no finish lines when injustice exists. So I was reading about racial discrimination the other day, and something like stuck with me. The author said that just because we had a black president doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. And so I thought about that really hard. And I was like, okay, how could I say that in terms of Loyola students? And I thought of our brilliant and talented Dean Tuckman, and I thought of our multifaceted president, Dr. Joanne Rooney, and I said, just because these wonderful women are in power doesn't mean sexism doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that there's an equal playing field automatically. We have progress, but we need to teach our fellow peers that there's always more to be done, and don't give up just because things are hard.
I think adding on to that, part of what we can do as a student body, as the Loyola community as a whole, is continue to hold Loyola responsible for their actions and their policies and what is happening at this university level and how we're impacting the community around us and what their response is to our efforts as a university. So whether that means looking at the fact that in Gentile Arena you can still purchase water bottles at sporting events, or looking at the fact that Loyola does not offer sexual health care or reproductive health care on campus, or looking at the fact that we're building and putting $2 million of capital resources from the university towards another athletic building, in addition to the donation by Mr. Norville. We need to hold Loyola responsible for what they're doing and look at how that's impacting not only the student community, but also the workers who are here, the faculty, and also the larger community of Chicago itself.
So I think the biggest thing that we need to do here is spread awareness. It's pretty obvious. Just creating an open dialogue with other organizations that any of you are in, tell them about this topic, tell your family and your friends. A big part psychologically to convince someone of the importance of the issue is explain to them how it affects them and what they can even do to fix it. And going off what you said about the reproductive issues here, I definitely see that within the Wellness Center. It's pretty upsetting to go in there with strep throat and then accuse you of an STI. Yeah, it's actually really common, I've heard. So just educating the staff, faculty, about feminism, ecofeminism, just sexism in general, so that like things like that do not happen to students here, and that's a safe place overall. Yeah, I think that, open dialogue, spreading awareness, biggest thing that we need to do.
Well, I love that you're teaching this in your environmental ethics course. I think that's one thing that we can do is sort of get these kinds of ideas out in our courses. We have so many really cool courses on this campus, and many of them are about women and gender and social justice, and this is an issue that, and environmental issues in general, environmental justice, those issues need to be brought to the forefront across our curriculum. So I think that's important. I also agree that we need to continue to hold ourselves responsible for, the actions and the decisions that we make at the university. But I would say just kind of my own perspective, maybe it's just my own style, and I know I'm totally quirky, but I think that women need to support women, and women need to support good men. And we need to not pay attention to the Donald Trumps of the world, We give these people too much attention and too much power. We need to take that away by just empowering ourselves and helping one another. And none of us are perfect friends. None of us are perfect girlfriends or boyfriends or, we all have issues. But I feel as though we also all have solid goodness inside, and that's what we really need to draw on, and we need to support that in one another. And I really feel like that's what's going to help us as a society to move forward in a positive direction. Just being with one another, being attentive to one another, and accompanying one another through life, and just being a good, supportive friend. And if you connect with people that think the way that you do, you can move mountains.
Okay, so I'll say one thing as a self-identified white cis heterosexual man who's tall with glasses. One of the things that's really important, right? I'll just speak for myself. For me to do is to listen, right? The way the system works, the logical domination works, is to make itself invisible and make it seem like that's just the way things are, and that there are no oppressive systems, and there are no experiences of oppression, right? To put them in the invisible sphere. So one right, small piece that's important for someone like me to do is actually to listen to people who have experiences and, right, ratify them or believe them, right, and say like, all right, that's an experience of oppression or some terrible thing, right, or right, an experience with a system that you've had, and you're like, I care about that, and I want to hear about it. And that's certainly not like the only thing you should do, right? That's not enough, but it's one thing that I think is important.
Okay, before we transition to audience questions, I would just like to put in a plug that one way to continue a conversation around this and to listen to people, especially in this sort of this discourse that we're discussing tonight. Next week, we'll be hosting another sort of panel event, but a dinner discussion surrounding environmental justice and environmental equity, which is just another great way to continue this. If you're all interested, that's next Thursday in Regis Hall, 5:30 p.m. But for now, we'll take the last few minutes to table any questions that the audience members might have. Tony.
Also, by the way, I have flyers for that event next week. But I have more of a comment that I would like for the panelists and everyone in this room to reflect on. I thought about it when the question is ecofeminism a theory or something that you actually apply and practice? And so my first introduction to ecofeminism was in Dr. Chaudhry's Foundations of Environmental Science course when she told us about the Hungarian Belt Movement, which is a bunch of women in a country in Africa who are planting trees because they're the ones responsible for getting wood and water. And so with that, I think ecofeminism succeeds where feminism fails. Feminism has a tendency to be exclusive, centered around the struggles of cis white females. The Women's March is a great example of how white feminism is the forefront of media and how people like me, people of color or low income, have to struggle to find their place in a movement. Ecofeminism cannot be exclusive. All people who identify as female or not, from every race and socioeconomic status, experience intersectionality of environmental issues affecting women. You cannot practice and apply ecofeminism and be exclusive. And that is why I like ecofeminism. And I think it's something that is definitely practiced. That's all I wanted to say.
Bravo.
I think you brought up the phrase like fertile or infertile with regards to like whether or not someone can get pregnant or not. Give me like a big beefy list. Like, can we all just like get a bunch of words to make women not sound like soil?
I would say that almost don't talk, like, if it's not your body, like, it's not something for you to comment on. So I think so many times when we talk about being fertile or barren and using the words that are so commonly applied to land, that it's someone else using those terms to describe another person. And so I'm an individual who has questionable fertility. I lost one of my ovaries. And so I think in processing that, and like as someone who doesn't know if they want kids, that I'm open in discussing it, and I'm willing to have those discussions about my personal fertility, but when using those words to talk about someone else, that it's just not something for necessarily others to comment on unless that individual themselves is bringing it up. So there aren't necessarily other words to use because the medical term is fertile versus infertile, because that's what was adopted, basically adopting the language that we use to describe nature itself. So there aren't necessarily other words, it's just keep it to yourself if it's not you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your questions, and thank you so much for the thoughtful answers. If we can just give everyone a round of applause. And now it's time for the second most exciting part of the evening, which is the raffle winners.
Yeah. Hi. Yep, me too. Okay. Which panel members would like to pull raffle tickets out of jars? Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're completely right. So we're gonna start with the things black high-waisted panties. Would you please grab a ticket for us? And the ticket number is 5824053. 5824053.
Do we have a winner? Sure.
This does not have me turned on, so there's no winner. We'll just go to the next one. Okay, I probably should have told everyone to take out your raffle. I'm assuming they're like just shoved at the bottom of everyone's pockets by now. Yeah. Let's try this again. Oh, this one has a name on it. Lily Cialov. Yes. Please see us in
Congratulations,
yes. We have the boy shorts and the thing shorts. At least the call. Next. No, okay. Another number. I want to look at their tickets real hard. 5824052. Okay, last but not least. Okay, the lucky winner is, actually, no, you should announce it.
Should I say it?
Yes.
All right. Ansley.
That's me.
All right, that's our draw for tonight.
Yeah, no, thanks for playing.
The reason that we chose to raffle off these prizes wasn't just because I wanted to order underwear from the mailroom and ask Saga to pay for it, but so they're sustainable menstrual products. You can reuse a diaper cup or you can reuse the underwear, and so we want to keep in the theme of caring for women and caring for the earth, so they weren't random. So with that, I think we're done. Thank you all for coming.
We need to thank Amanda and Rosie, so we can give them a huge round of applause.
Eat more food. I don't know what to do with it.
What about thanking the very brave guys that came out tonight?
Why do you want me to say
Sorry at the first.